Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I would like to talk to you about two things. The first one is the International Rare Diseases Research Consortium that I personally find very exciting, and I hope that you also will find it a very interesting approach. I will also talk a little bit about the EU research funding for rare diseases, an area in which we have been active from the European Commission's funding side for a couple of decades now. So I will tell you a little bit about what we have done and also what we will do in the future. I will apologize in advance because I have a lot of slides, so I will also speak very quickly, and some of the slides I will go through very quickly, but you have them in your slide pack there, so you can go back and have a look at them, and you can also approach me at lunchtime if you have questions. So, as you all know, rare diseases is a very big challenge, too big to be mastered alone. Huge unmet medical needs, small patient populations, scarce and scattered research resources and expertise around the world. This is a very recent slide and it's quite complex, but I just wanted to highlight that we are only knowing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to rare diseases, when we talk about rare disease genes and rare disease phenotypes. The rate by which rare disease genes are discovered today is about 150 genes identified per year, which means that if we would have what's estimated 1,500 rare disease genes still to identify, it would take us about 10 years from now before we have the complete set. Then we still need to look into all the phenotypic variations. We also heard a presentation previous from EMA, and Agnes also mentioned that we only have therapies for about 2% of the rare diseases today. So based on sort of this very fragmented and scattered and high need, my director, Ruxandra Draghi-Akli, together with Francis Collins, head of the NIH, came together, had a discussion and said maybe it would be a good idea that actually we would cooperate much closer on rare diseases to really make a big investment and really speed up the progress into this area. And that was the starting point of the International Rare Diseases Research Consortium. It was decided that this consortium would have two very challenging objectives: to have 200 new therapies and means to diagnose most rare diseases by 2020. The discussion between Ruxandra and Francis took place in 2010 and was followed by an exploratory workshop in Reykjavik, which was followed by a larger meeting in Washington where the initiative was launched. We then ventured on to set up scientific committees, working group. We've held a big conference and we are very well underway now. In fact, we already have, as you see, more than 40 committed partners into this collaboration. What's interesting with this collaboration is that it brings together research funders, charities, patients organizations, industry, to come together and to really figure out how we best can put our resources together to really progress rare disease research. As you see, we are already members from 4 continents here, which is also very fascinating because it really brings together the pool of information to be much, much broader than if we would work solely, let's say, in North America or in Europe or in Asia. The basic principles are that all of us who are investing in rare disease research come together, and the criteria is that you would invest at least $10 million over a 5-year period. The beauty of this initiative is that it's not about putting money into a pool. It is about each partner using their own means to invest in research through their normal procedures, may that be in-house research or through launching calls for proposals. What is important is to make sure that we share the data that is being generated through all this research. So I will quickly just show you the governance structure. So if you become a member of this consortia, you participate to the executive committee. The executive committee has also set up 3 scientific committees who works on the policy, the guidelines, and also for the roadmap, guiding all the members on how to place their investments in the future to make sure that we are really covering as broadly as possible the different rare disease research. The scientific committees felt that for certain areas, they also would like to have the help of the working groups. And these are members or representatives of projects that have been funded from the different funders. So as you see, it's a rather broad and varied type of work ongoing, going from model systems to ethics, governance, repurposing, etc. So it's very broad. And it really brings together in these scientific committee and the working groups, it brings together experts from rare disease research from the 4 continents. Already on the IRDIRC website, you could find the IRDIRC policies and guidelines, which is the common framework where sort of guides how we would share data and how we would like to see progress being made. So these data are sort of divided into 3 different categories about sharing, the data and resources and how to deal with interoperability and harmonization of data. It's about scientific standards, requirements and regulations, and it's about the participation of patients or their representatives in research. We also have policies and guidelines for the funding bodies, which is very much about how we would go on and sort of side by side invest in research in the future. There is currently a roadmap being developed, and this roadmap will very much guide us through the coming years and to make sure that we are filling the gaps that exist in the work. I have just put here one example, which is the roadmap for the diagnostics area. So as you see, there will be a lot of work going on in parallel. We are currently waiting for the roadmap for the therapies. Scientific committee, it should come very shortly. And we also have one for the interdisciplinary committee. And at the next executive committee meeting that will take place in Berlin in May, we will look at these roadmaps and see a little bit more, who will go where, etc. I quickly mentioned the first IRDIRC conference that took place in Dublin in April last year, which brought together more than 400 participants. It was a fascinating odyssey about research studies ongoing. You can find the report at the IRDIRC website. The second IRDIRC conference will take place in November this year. It will be hosted and organized by BGI, and it will be held in Shenzhen in China. We are still waiting for more detailed information, but keep a lookout on the IRDIRC website if you would like to participate to this conference. I will quickly move on now to the work that we do at the European Commission in terms of research funding. So we have invested in rare disease research over 2 decades, maybe I first should explain that the research funding that we do at European level is in multi-annual framework programs. Historically, they have been 4 years, but we have recently moved over to 7-year programs. That means that we have a stable funding situation for that 7-year period. We know the orientation, and then we break that down into annual work programs. This is very beneficial for us because we know which area we are going to invest in the coming 7-year period, and we already know the budget that will be available for these various areas, which is something that I know that our colleagues from NIH, for example, is looking at with envy as they need to go every year and to defend their budgets. So if you look at how our research investments has increased, we started with 47 projects in what was called the Framework Program 5, which is about 20 years ago, with 64 million. And over the last 7-year period, we have invested more than 620 million euros, and we currently have a portfolio of about 120 projects. This is one example of research that we are funding. In this case, it was a project that started as a very much, I would say, basic research project under 5th Framework Program. It was then called Juraman. It was then submitted again and came in for further clinical research in FP6. It was then called Human. And in IFP7, we got a clinical trial project coming in called Alpha Man, and this one you see is the characterization of mutations in the alpha mannose gene to a first-in-man clinical trials in patients. So this is an example of how small companies often are using our research program to collaborate with researchers in Europe, but also in other areas of the world to really progress their areas, and they can go really from the basic research all the way up to clinical trials and request funding from our programs. I also should mention that we are funding other types of projects as well. In this case, it's a project where member states funding programs come together and have a joint programmatic approach to fund rare disease and orphan drug development. This project is called IRDIRC, and it is bringing together 17 research agencies for 13 countries in the European Union and also from other countries outside the EU. They're currently funding over 60 projects, with an investment of about 45 million euros. So you see, overall, it's a very huge investments that are being done both at member state level as well as the EU level in Europe for time being. We currently have a topic open to fund a continuation for an IRDIRC, and we hope that that will also be a successful project. Of course, this meeting is about orphan drugs, but I also want to mention the diagnostics because, of course, it's a vital part. And we have, for many years, funded a project called Eurogene Test, which is very much about harmonization, validation, and standardization of genetic testing. And it's really to improve and bring a common standard of how genetic testing is performed in Europe, but also through colleagues, this project has also extended and also are helping developing countries, in particular in Latin and South America, to develop their clinics to also perform genetic testing to the same standards as we are doing here. Our 7th framework program came to an end last year. And as I mentioned, that was a 7-year program. And through this program, we funded a very, very sort of broad portfolio of different type of projects, anything from natural history, registries, biobanks, biomarkers, and also clinical trials. Our single biggest investment was in 2012 and 2013, where we invested 200 million euros. And what we did is we also broadened our approach to include some novel approaches to really progress the scientific basis for rare disease research. Before I go into a bit more detail about that, I should say that we currently in our portfolio, it says 17, but actually we have just funded the 18th. So we have 18 projects for orphan drugs with a current EU investment of 80 million euros. These projects are dealing either with preclinical or clinical development and need to have a clear potential as an orphan drug. We also are funding 3 projects which are looking at clinical trial designs. So this is not clinical trials per se, but it's actually about the clinical trial design. And the idea here is to really look at the benefit and the strength and opportunities, but maybe also the drawbacks of new clinical trial methodologies for small populations. We are very pleased because these 3 projects are working very closely together, and they also work closely together with our colleagues at the European Medicines Agency who are participating in their advisory board. And that's really important for us because that also means that whatever is being developed also have a relevance from the regulatory viewpoint. Another approach we have taken is to really take stock of the wealth of omics technologies and omics information out there. You know, genomics is only one thing, but we also have epigenomics, metagenomics, and a whole variety of different omics, proteomics. I mean, I could go on all day to mention economics as well. And What we have started to do is to really try to more systematically apply the omics to rare diseases. So we are funding two very big consortia which are looking at applying omics in one case to rare kidney disorders and the other one to rare neuromuscular and neurodegenerative disorders. Because we believe that these omics technologies, to really prove their validity, we need to look at the monogenetic rare diseases before we can move over to the common diseases which are multifactorial. So it's an area where there will be benefits reaped for rare diseases and orphan drug development, but it's also information that also can be used for develop medicines for common diseases. In addition to these two projects, we are also funding a project that are looking more at the bioinformatics side of all this data generation. And in particular, working on ontologies and also to link together with the clinical information, to bring together the phenotypic information and the clinical information with the omics data, and we call this clinical bioinformatics. This is a completely novel approach that we have not done before, and we're very much looking forward to learn more about the progress and the novelties that will come from this area. So I mentioned that FP7 came to an end last year, which means that we have a new program starting this year called Horizon 2020. It will cover the period from 2014 to 2020. And we will fund research and innovation with around 80 billion euros in total. That covers all areas, including health, but also aeronautics and energy and all kinds of areas. So a part of that budget goes distinctly to health research, and more than 7 billion euros are directly dedicated to rare disease research. The remainder of the budget are open to other areas, but there will also be benefits for rare disease research through other funding schemes such as research infrastructures, etc., which although we're open to any area, we know that there are a lot of research infrastructures such as biobanks, patient registries, etc., that can be funded through this program. For Horizon 2020, we will go all the way through from very basic research into clinical trials, but we will also look more at the health outcomes and also on piloting healthcare, so which means, for example, to bring personalized medicine approaches and to apply that into healthcare setting in view of building a stronger evidence base. We are also going to look much more on HTA methodologies, and a number of other areas which are very relevant for actually bringing the new scientific findings into the healthcare and reaching out to the patients faster. As I mentioned, we are working with work programs which are annual. The 2014 work program and 2015 work program are published on our web. And in fact, we have a first deadline for one of our calls tomorrow. And for 2015, that call has not yet opened. It will open later this year. The focus of these two work programs is very much on personalizing health and care, and there are several opportunities for rare disease research. I mentioned already that we have a topic to continue the IRDIRC, which brings together the national research funders. But we have a specific topic for the development of new therapies for rare diseases. As I mentioned, this call has not yet opened, but you have the topic online, so you can look through that. And what is important, and I must mention, is that we will require that when we go in and fund clinical trials, applicants must prove that they do have an orphan designation. And we are also requesting that scientific advice protocol assistance has been given by EMA, and that must be reflected in the work plan that is presented. That is a bit stronger requirement that we have had previously, but we have learned a little bit from our experiences because we have seen a lot of projects coming into us, being given a grant for conducting a clinical trial, and when they have signed the grant, they come to EMA, ask for the protocol assistance, and it means that they will then need to go back and maybe revise their clinical trial design, and we may have lost 2 years. So we really would like to sharpen up that. So those of you who are ready to go into clinical trial, have all the components ready, we are happy, to go in and fund that. If it's not ready, you can still submit the proposal, but then it would not be the clinical trial. It could be for preparatory work, or we also go down to preclinical work and also to develop animal models. So it's a very broad topic, but I just want to mention that if you want to do clinical trials, it has to be very, ready to push the button. I would also like to mention the support for European reference networks, which is something new that has come up over the last years, where the same thing applies, that this call has not yet opened, but the information is out there. This is much more about harmonizing the clinical care. What is not on this slide, but I also need to mention, there was questions previously about biomarkers, and we are also funding biomarker validation, clinical validation of biomarkers. But we are funding that through a new instrument called the SME instrument. It means that we can go in and fund single entities for the first time. All the other topics that I've talked about is collaborative research, where you need to have 3 entities. But in the case of biomarkers, there can be single companies qualifying as a small and medium-sized enterprise in Europe, can come and request funding for the clinical validation of biomarkers. It's a program which has 4 phases. The first phase is to look at the business plan and really verify the work that needs to be done. It's a small lump sum of 50,000 euros. And the second phase would be to conduct the clinical validation of biomarkers, and there we can go up to 5 million euros. The SMEs can then decide if they would like to collaborate with other partners in the project, or if they would like to subcontract out part of their work. That is a decision that they can take. There are many other funding opportunities which are open for all diseases, so they are not specifically for rare diseases, but there are plenty of opportunities in terms of more basic research in understanding disease mechanisms, about developing, evaluating screening programs. We do fund a lot about diagnostics, some diagnostics developments, both in vitro and in vivo. Of course, we also have specific topics on advanced therapies, regenerative medicine that may be interesting. And I would also like to draw the attention to other type of funding that is available, for example, the research infrastructures. There is a lot of discussions going on to set up kind of a supra network of patient registries in Europe to make sure that we would have sort of a one-stop shop, one entry point, where if you would conduct clinical trials, that you can go there and you can see what registries would be available. That is still under development. It is proposed to be coordinated by our colleagues in the Joint Research Center. So we hope that that is something that will take off very soon as well, because that's something that I think really will benefit all of those who are doing clinical research in rare diseases. We also have the Marie Sklodowska Actions, which are training programs. There are training programs in Europe, but there are also international programs, either to go from Europe outside or from the rest of the world, or come into Europe. So that's also for colleagues from other parts of the world. So that's really a nice sort of exchange. And the same goes for the European Research Council. Is also open for students from around the world. So with this, I would like to conclude. I would like to say that we continue to have a very strong interest, and will continue to support rare disease research. And those of you who are in companies who are participating here, be aware that there is a wealth of information that is going to come through this international cooperation that we do. So I advise you to keep an eye on that. There the scientific progress happens very fast, and in a very, we're trying to do that in a much more coordinated manner than what we have done previously. With this, I would like to thank you, and I take questions in the panel session later on.